Welcome to Reimagining the Future Workforce in the context of COVID-19. Today we're faced with far-reaching change. It's a test of our leadership, our culture, our organizational capabilities. I think Milton Friedman said it best. He was an influential economist of the 20th century, and he wrote in 1982, "Only a crisis, real or perceived, produces real change. And when that crisis occurs, the actions that are taken depend on the ideas that are lying around." While we focused in the first podcast on why you need to do this work and introduced you to a couple of case studies to show you what's involved, today we're going to focus on how to get started with a deeper dive and a systematic and structured approach to what can only be described as a roller coaster. In addition, we'll touch on the impact of COVID-19. But before we do, for those of you who didn't listen in on the first podcast, Martin, would you like to introduce yourself briefly?
Thank you, Jennifer, and welcome back to our second podcast. So my name is Martin Jessen. I have worked in global HR leadership roles for Schneider Electric and IBM, and today I help organizations working on finding an alignment between the HR strategies and their business transformations. Apropos reimagination, if you look at our title page, the artwork here is from a gentleman called Le Corbusier. He was a French-Swiss architect in the first half of the 20th century. He was deeply involved in the topic of urbanization, and he shaped architectures that really redefine the way we live and work in cities, and he's a great case study on reimagination. But let's focus on reimagination of our workforce. But before doing that, Jennifer, could you please introduce yourself?
Thank you, Martin. I'll just mention briefly that I have my own consultancy. I work with strategic partners to deliver OD solutions like change management, as well as workforce planning and total rewards. Before that, I had senior leadership positions in companies like Synopsys, Seagate, and Logitech in Silicon Valley. So let's go to our agenda and get us started on this journey, if you will, Martin.
Thank you, Jennifer. Let me take you back for a moment to our first podcast where we discussed that a critical starting point was to work with your stakeholders to really get aligned on what is the business problem that you want to solve with your people plan. We discussed various business problems and how to approach those in the first podcast. And today we are going to focus on one of those business problems, which is the strategic shift in your business. Okay, there are lots of different examples of strategic shifts. For example, establishing a software business, building a services business for your organization, becoming an IoT player, becoming a digitization player, changing your go-to-market model.
Those are obviously all initiatives where you anticipate that you need a different type of people, different type of talent, a different type of workforce, perhaps a different way of working, even a different way of organizing yourself. So at the end, you would really like to come out with a strategic workforce plan. You can also call it a people plan. There are so many names to it, and I don't care what you call it. What the important thing is that it solves your business problem. This does sound straightforward, but it's easier said than done. Our experience is that it's anything else but a linear kind of journey. It's much more a roller coaster. That said, I think there is a way to steer the roller coaster. There is a systematic path to get to a good people plan. And there will be points of reimagination happening along the way. Let's go through this step by step and look at the key questions that you ask at each of the points. I refer to a case study from my own experience. I was the head of HR of a global commercial organization, and that was serving the largest customers of the company. So let's start with substance. The big question in the beginning is, what does success look like? And I admit that's a little bit of an overused question, but honestly, it really is a powerful reflection on where you want to take your journey. Yeah? In my example, the transformation that this commercial organization was pursuing was to move from a transactional sales to really developing a deeper customer intimacy, and really establish themselves as the trusted advisor to their customers, and to position themselves to provide solution to the customer's pain points. Okay. So with that understanding, you can now move to the stage of planning. The big question you're going to ask is really, what does it take to make this initiative happen? You explore the capabilities you need, so the mechanisms to make this initiative happening. You're also looking at the quantitative side, looking at the volumes that you're expecting, and what sort of capacity you need to handle this initiative. Let me take you back to my example. So the leadership team realized that deep customer relations and intimacy were really the key to understand the needs and the pain points to determine how to help the customer in their transformations. The next step was then to really break it down into the details, into the work tasks of each of those capabilities. So what does it take to put together a customer strategy? How do you pursue a sales opportunity, and so forth? You can use design thinking or the lean methodology as methods to really go into those details. Those are very powerful and helpful tools, and I certainly recommend to make this investment. So we did the analysis work to determine the capabilities, the capacity, and you've gone down to the details to understand the work task, and that really will help you to think through the ideal way to organize this. Back to my example, we headed towards a very lean core key account management team that worked in a very agile network approach. So to mobilize sellers and experts in other divisions, in other countries, to work on the different accounts and to work on sales opportunities. Okay. Technology is obviously now a key enabler on how to get work done. And that's why the previous step was so important, to really lay out the different tasks and then to ask yourself, where can technology really play a value-added role? And here the innovations are endless around artificial intelligence, automation, and so forth. Now we get to the classical workforce planning part. So what are the critical roles and critical competencies to really make this initiative happening? And how many do you need, where, and at what time? What really made a difference was to go very deep on defining the success profiles for each of those roles. Now we know who we would like, and now the question comes, where do we find them? Okay. It's really a question around build versus buy, perhaps borrow or outsource or acquire. And so there are lots of sources to fulfill your demands. Just as a side note here, especially on the temporary initiatives, there is this trend that companies are creating open talent marketplaces where people can participate or apply to participate in gigs, and the benefit is here that people can develop themselves and develop themselves horizontally. Okay, so that's a very interesting innovation as a source for your initiatives. And back to my example, we did go for 50% build, so really developing internal talent, and 50% buy, where we recruited talent in the marketplace, in the external marketplace. And we also extensively used assessments to evaluate people against the success profiles that I mentioned earlier. And we had a strong cadence of talent reviews to continuously discuss if we had the right talent on board, and really to be focused on their development and coaching. to upskill them in the right direction. Which takes us to our last milestone in the planning step. It's really to evaluate if the people practices really serve the strategic purpose and really ensuring that it creates an employee experience that is relevant and attractive to potentially the very new people that you're bringing on board. Okay, so in my example here, we changed the reward structures, the incentive plans. We tailored the learning paths, both for our existing talent, but also the new hires that we brought on board. And we worked very closely with talent acquisition to really build a strong pipeline of candidates that were really in line with the success profiles that we were looking for in our talent.
So this is what the roller coaster looks like. Perhaps there will be many U-turns and changes of direction, but I think if you take this more systematic approach, you will get to a good people plan. So Jennifer, what does this look like in the context of COVID?
Thank you, Martin. It does really feel like a roller coaster at times. I'm sure that resonates with many of our participants. So in the context of COVID-19, the same overriding questions apply, but additional questions come up. And using this same case study, let's unpack the impact of COVID-19 on our systematic approach. Before the pandemic, we visualized teams across the company working together to deliver configurable solutions to customers, right? Flying into the customer site, making presentations, to meet face-to-face was really important to establish customer relationships, demonstrating that we're better than our competitors at delivering exactly what the customer needs, right? But after COVID-19, what's the face to the customer? With customers varying by what return to work phase they're in, a customized approach is really what we have to look at. What's the right combination of technology and people to provide solutions to customers? And that might vary by customer. Our account planning team, for instance, has to know by customer, by site, by contact, how they're conducting business. So it is a combination of technology and people. But what combination is the question? In terms of the work tasks, how do we drive a collaborative and innovative solution by virtual teams, both customer and company? And what account team roles have to be on site to integrate with customer systems? When and what can be done remotely? We never really had to grapple with these questions before. If certain roles have to be done on site, how do we reassure employees it's safe to return to the site, right? So globally, we may be deploying account teams in a different way. We may have much more distributed account teams. The account teams themselves will be formed very differently. Who can be redeployed to represent the account team at the customer site in Singapore or Finland? The very structure of the account team may be different. It may need to be more fluid, more agile than ever before. And it could be that local hiring has to ramp up for our most critical skills to support our most strategic global customers. And of course, what will this cost? With budgets tight and tech talent still very much in high demand. So let's go to the last slide, where we discuss the 7 keys to being successful at reimagining the future workforce. We believe these are important points, and we'll be talking more about some of them at our next podcast on getting results. But let me highlight 1 or 2 of these points. We saw in the case study how important it is to embed yourself in the business. This is even now more important than ever, as there's a great deal of uncertainty and things are changing very fast. It's like a war zone. You have to be embedded to know from moment to moment what's changing and how it impacts your business in order to know how to respond. The other 2 points, points 6 and 7, leading the execution. means seizing this moment to organize a plan to support any change in your business priorities. Remember, Friedman's comment about actions that are taken depend on the ideas lying around. Well, this is the idea lying around. And point 7, engaging and seeking alignment with stakeholders, so important for any initiative that you're trying to achieve adoption around. So to overcome resistance to adoption and implementation of the plan itself, we'll discuss how to engage and align stakeholders in our next podcast. So until then, thank you for listening in to our second podcast in the series, Reimagining the Future Workforce. And don't forget to comment on LinkedIn. Until then, thank you.
Thanks for joining, and really looking forward to our next podcast about how to deliver results.